It is also me. This is hard. Oh my God. Okay. And what, Sorcha? It's also what? Trying again. Conas, how are ye? Welcome back to the Candlelit Tales YouTube channel, where we are talking about the time of year, the best time of year. It's Samhain. And we're going to talk about the greatest of the Celtic fire festivals, the Celtic New Year, the most important one, the most significant one, everybody's favourite time of year when you get to dress up, eat, drink, celebrate, go around with your friends, cause some mischief. And a lot of the origins of the things that we do today at Halloween can be traced back through traditional Irish practices that we engaged in at Samhain. So that's what we're going to talk about today. First, a note on pronunciation. It's Samhain. Some people find the pronunciation difficult, a little bit like, Irish names like Niamh and Kiva and frankly, Sorcha. It can be a little bit confusing to see it written out, Samhain, and to realise that makes the sound Samhain and not anything that would seem a little bit more obvious. But that's what I'm going to call it. That's how I pronounce it. I'm not getting into correct, incorrect, because I think that's dicey with old languages. But I will say Samhain makes me twitch. So the word Samhain is a word in the Irish language. It means November. Mina Hauna is just the Irish for the month of November. It also probably means or derives from summer's end, but it's one of those very old words where I'm not sure we're sure exactly what it means or what the etymology is, but it means the end of the summer. And it is traditionally in Irish the start of winter. We've had other videos in this series talking about the Celtic fire festivals, and we've mentioned how the festival starts at dusk, kind of the day before, and that's the same with Samhain. And it's also the same with the way we think of winter, because if you think about the year and the day as being related, winter begins at Samhain rather than at midwinter. The day begins at dusk rather than beginning at midnight. I feel like it makes sense to me in an intuitive way. We're not in the middle of winter yet, but we are coming into winter. This is the threshold of winter. And all of these fire festivals are big on this idea of threshold and in between. Samhain is also the biggest one. It's the Celtic New Year. It was when the New Year was celebrated. That's going way back. Now, the New Year thing, the Christianization of this is something that we'll talk about in a minute. But Samhain is a harvest festival. It's celebrating the end of the harvest, and it represents a kind of a cut-off point. There's this old superstition that particularly wild fruit, like blackberries and mushrooms, would be spit or peed on by either the devil or the fairies, depending on where you are and who you're talking to, and that you should not pick any after Samhain. After the 1st of November, you don't pick those fruits anymore. You leave them be because they're blighted, and if you eat them, you could consume some of that blight and get sick. It's probably just because Ireland is kind of a mouldy country and a damp country, and so probably a lot of them are bad after that point. I think there's a real symbolic downing of tools at Samhain, this is the end of the work. This is the end of the hard work, because the harvest is the busiest time on a farm. It's the time when you're trying to gather everything in. And it's also a really edgy time. This is when you know if you have enough supplies in a pre-industrial culture to last you through the winter without people starving, because that's the kind of existence they had in Ireland pre-industrial revolution. It was a solid indication of how good is your year going to be. And it was also a celebration because if you were somebody who lived in that kind of way, this was as full as your stores were ever going to get. This is the time when you have the most of everything that you are ever going to have. There's an old saying about the 7 fat weeks between Samhain and Christmas, which is just sort of a general time of plenty, which I think we still very much have in Ireland. Between Samhain and Christmas is when everybody goes, oh my God, I haven't seen that friend in a year. I need to go and meet them for a drink and catch up and go out and celebrate. And it's kind of non-stop for a while. Samhain is the beginning of that celebratory period. And it's the time when the hard work, the hard physical work is finished for the year. The days are shorter. everything's getting a little bit cozier, everybody's coming indoors, and there's some like feasting and merrymaking to market. So stepping way, way back, there are a number of beliefs about how ancient Samhain was celebrated. Some of them are not particularly easy to verify, but there is some evidence of like ritual burnings on certain sites, particularly the sacred hills. So this particular hill that is associated with Samhain is the hill of Clothra. Talk about a word that's hard to say from seeing it written down. Clothra is also called the Hill of Ward. It's in Athboy in County Meath. The story goes, we'll say, that on Samhain, all lights in Ireland would be extinguished. On the 31st of November, the whole country went dark. No fires lit, no torches, embers doused, everything put out. And that at Clothra, the druids, the poets, the high kings would relight the first fire, calling the ancestors back through the veil, and that then a little spark of that fire would be carried out to the other royal hills. So the royal hills were Ishnuk and Tara, both in Meath, Cashel in Munster, Rathcroghan in Connacht, Owenmacca or Navan Fort in Ulster, and Dunallina in Leinster. So there was this idea of spreading out the fires little by little, and then after the fires on the hills were relit, that flame would be carried on out into the communities and finally into the individual households. Whether or not that actually happened exactly like that, I couldn't tell you. I won't swear to it. But it's a very cool idea of just every single fire in the country just going dark at the same time, and everybody kind of having that moment to stare into the darkness together to, remember the people who had passed on, because it's always been very associated with ancestor worship and with the dead. And then, the fire being relit through a community connection. Like everybody's fire is lit from the same fire. So you're not going off and striking your own spark. It's very much a coming together. Whether that really happened exactly like that or not, I don't know. That's the story. But Clothra is named after a person, or rather a goddess. The story of Clothra is not very well known, and there's probably a reason for that, because it's not a very nice story. It is one of those stories of a very powerful goddess who is kind of violated and killed and cast down, which seems to happen a suspiciously high amount of the time to ancient powerful goddesses, almost like someone did that on purpose to shift the centres of power. But that's a different theory for a different day. Clothra was a powerful druid. She was maybe a goddess. She was maybe a sky goddess, which is another thing that people consider to be kind of unusual. We have this idea nowadays that the sky is the male figure and the earth is the female, and that's not really true in ancient cultures. There isn't much consistency around that. So she was a powerful druid. She was maybe a sky goddess. She had this flying machine powered by lightning called the Ramach that was able to travel across the sky with her father, who was another powerful druid called Mugroth. Clothra and her father went to study with this character called Simon Magus, who was a Christian era heretic. Like, he was described as the first heretic, and therefore associated with paganism, with dark magic, with all these kinds of things. So she and her father went to visit Simon. Her father and Simon Magus got on really well together, and so Mugroth and Simon Magus studied together. Meanwhile, Clothra took the flying machine and took off. She went all around the world learning on her own. And when she came back to the two men who had been bet into the books and studying together, they found out that her knowledge far outstripped theirs. And out of embarrassment and shame, Simon Magus set his 3 sons, and maybe her father, but certainly Simon Magus set his 3 sons on her. They violated her. She returned to Ireland, and she gave birth on the hill that bears her name. She gave birth on the Hill of Ward, the Hill of Clothra, and gave birth to triplets. She named them Dorb, Cuma and Muach, and that's kind of the end of the story, except for she died in childbirth, and she left a kind of an instruction that her sons' names be remembered. And like a lot of Irish mythology, what does that mean? I don't know. What's Clothra? I don't know. Is there more stories about Clothra? Probably there were at some point, and they don't exist anymore probably because people thought that they shouldn't exist anymore. So it's kind of a downer of a story. But I think the fact that this very important ritual site carries her name says something about how important she may once have been. And I'm saying might and may a lot because I don't know. We don't really have hard evidence for a lot of this stuff. So Samhain had a lot to do with the dead and with ancestor work. And this extinguishing and relighting of fires is thought to have something to do with calling the dead home, that there were sort of thin places and there are thin times. The other world is separated from this world by a veil, and the veil is very thin at certain times and the veil is very thin at certain places. And if you get a magically potent place like Clothra and a magically potent time like Samhain and you put them together with a big fire, that's the thinnest place and the thinnest time, and therefore all of the spirits who kind of leak out into the world on Samhain Eve can be called back in and called back and like given the focal point to like go back to the other world so that order can be restored. Because let me tell you, order is not restored during the Feast of Samhain. Samhain is very much not an orderly holiday. Which I think a little bit of that chaos and mischief is a lot of what people like about it, and a lot of what carried down to the modern era is this idea of like things being backwards, things being upside down, things being a little bit like pranks and tricks and like, you know, carrying on that you can do. So it was very, very strongly believed that the dead came back. And this got Christianized. Samhain became Christianized as All Souls Day. So November the 1st is All Souls Day in the Christian calendar or in the Catholic calendar. I don't know if all Christians celebrate it actually, but I don't know. I don't know a lot about Christians. Anyway, I was just raised by Christian grandparents. It's not my fault. It was Christianized. And I have a feeling that a lot of the darker elements of Samhain kind of came in with the Christianization. Because looking at Irish myth, dead and death is not so fearsome in Irish mythology. Like you get stories of characters like Oscar and Cuchulainn like seeing their deaths being prophesized and like gleefully running towards it because it's just not that scary. It's not that terrifying. I think there was a little bit more of an awareness of life and death being cyclical and them being in balance together, whereas certainly with Christianity coming in, there was a lot more fear around Samhain and a lot more of that like scary, spooky vibe starts to creep in. I think, again, this is me. This is not an ancient text. This is me going purely off vibes in old stories and vibes in more recent folklore. And when I say more recent folklore, I mean like not that recent. When Christianity comes in, it becomes All Souls Day, which is preceded by All Hallows Eve, which got shortened over time to Hallows Eve and then Hallows evening, Eve, Halloween. You get it. Etymology. There were very serious folk beliefs that people came back and like walked the earth. There's a great book that I cite often, which is Kevin Danaher's The Year in Ireland. Sadly out of print, but check your library for it. And he talks about accounts of people being particularly frightened if somebody had passed away that they had wronged or tricked, because that spirit could come back and like get them or get back at them at Halloween or on Samhain, because there was just this general like certainty. It feels like stronger than superstition that the dead came back. And people would leave food out. People would leave out a little bit of the crop would be left in the ground for the fairies or for the spirits. There's also a lot of like fitcha between like what stuff was done for fairies and what stuff was done for spirits and ancestors in different parts of the country. Those things kind of get a little bit intermingled. So food was very much left out. It was considered to be a very potent time. Now, Ireland didn't originate the trick-or-treat practice necessarily, but like pranks were often played and they could be blamed on spirits, because if somebody was very afraid that this old lady that they had cheated last year, who had since passed away, was going to come back looking for revenge, well, you could probably mess with their garden of cabbages a little bit and blame it on her. Now, you did get kind of similar traditions to what you got at other fire festivals, and you can check our other videos for those that we've done about Bealtaine and Lunasa and Imbolg, which was that sometimes people would get together, particularly young men, and like dress up as old women or as hags and go house to house, like performing and doing entertainment, putting soot on their faces, you know, singing songs and playing tunes for apples and nuts and things like that. Getting together and playing games was a really big thing. People would get together and like bob for apples, and fishing for coins was a big deal. So the whole thing with Samhain being like the time of year where you're able to take stock and look ahead, and you know that you have enough food for the year ahead, hopefully, and you have some idea of what the future is going to bring, lends itself very naturally to it being a time of forecasting and divination and looking into the future a bit more deliberately and a bit more ritually. There's a traditional type of bread in Ireland called barn brack, or borin brack in Irish. It's a sort of a fruitcake, but inside in the fruitcake they used to put little trinkets. So a ring, and if whoever got the ring would be married in the coming year. A pea, and whoever got the pea would be poor. A coin, and whoever got the coin would be rich. So there was all these little like traditional kind of surprises and tricks and things like that. And I think different people probably had different things that they put into their barn bracks, but this was like a nice little fortune telling game. You have a piece of cake and maybe it tells you about the future. I remember this being like a thing when I was a kid, where supermarkets were like taking them out because people were chipping tooths and suing and things like that, and it was kind of like, what is the world coming to that we can't have rings in the barn brack anymore? There were a lot of these kinds of games, and I do mean a lot. So I'm not going to go into like an exhaustive list of them, but like there was a saucer game where you would put a ring in one, clay in the other, and water in the third, and then blindfold the person, and everybody would like put their hand out, and whatever one they put their hand in would tell the future. The ring was marriage, the clay was death, and the water was a journey or emigration. They got a little dark. A lot of it had to do with who you married, which back in the day, before, you know, divorce was legal in Ireland in the 90s, it was very important to know who you were going to marry and to like have a good marriage. So people were really preoccupied with that if they weren't married yet. And so there was a huge number of traditions around like how to find out who you were going to marry. And a lot of that had to do with like leaving a shirt out to dry, either in front of the fire or by the river, and then watching to see who would come and turn it over. And whoever turned it over was like the person you were going to marry. Or putting like string into a kiln was another one, and like seeing who would wind it back up again. Kind of doing the first half of a job and then seeing who came up and cleaned up after you seems to have been the vibe for like a lot of them. As I said, a lot. I said 3, and I'm like, there's so many, and there's so many variations, and there's so many different ways that people had of like foretelling different things. James Joyce has a story about that in Dubliners, I think, where he talks about that, like, you know, somebody getting the clay and everyone being really mortified and trying to like play it off like she didn't put her hand in the clay and wasn't going to die. Divination was like a huge thing, but it also certainly in the Christian era was very frowned upon, because according to the parish priests, that was really like messing with devil worship. And there are a lot of like folklore stories about somebody staying up to see who their future, their intended husband would like come and turn over the sheet, and seeing like a ghost or seeing something monstrous and dying of fright shortly thereafter. This was very much kind of like a censored practice that was like, you know, people were trying to, or at least the church was very much trying to like put down a little bit and like discourage people from. It doesn't seem to have worked very well. People seem to have been really, really into it. And I think, you know, the fright of like, ooh, maybe the devil will show up is kind of part of the fun with that kind of stuff. Because, you know, maybe the devil shows up. It's like slumber party games. Maybe Bloody Mary turns up this time. So a lot of the gatherings had food involved, obviously. Soul cakes is one of the traditions that gets brought up a lot as like another one of those little bits that maybe is a precursor to trick-or-treating, which kind of mushed all of these things together a little bit. The soul cake being like something that was given out to people who called around, singing or offering entertainment, but also might have been like baked in honor of the dearly departed. They were, I think, little like honey oat cake kind of type dealies. That seems to have been what they were. I haven't tried making them. There was also a tradition of leaving a candle in the window, and in some places one candle for every person that you were close to who had died in the past year, or every person in the family who died in the past year. So some windows were quite full of candles. Halloween lanterns, the putting the soot on the face, the like dressing up, was, I think, mostly a prank thing. I don't know if there was a more reverent kind of antecedent for that. There might have been. I don't know. It's kind of fun to speculate about. Maybe this was an ancestor worship thing. Maybe it was a like, don't, confuse the dead in case any of them come back malicious, and so they can't see your face. So if a dead person has a grudge against you, they can't find you. And another thing that was like shows up in the old mythology that I think is also maybe a little bit of that like trick or treat idea, or you can see how it comes through in it, is this tradition that you see in old stories, like the story of how Angus Og got his home in Brúnaboinne, which is this idea that you don't carry weapons on Samhain. It's a peaceful night, and you open your door to anybody who comes. So you always open the door, because whoever is coming might be somebody from your family who died. It might be a spirit. It might be a being of the other world. So you open the door, you give them hospitality. In the old myth, the line is that the householder has to give any request within reason. So in that story, Angus Og wants to get his mother's house. He was conceived illegitimately. His father is the Dagda, his mother Boann, and Boann's husband Elkmar had her home at Brúnaboinne. So the Dagda told Angus Og to go there at Samhain because there would be no weapons, and to ask Elkmar to allow him to stay in the brew for a day and a night, because the tradition was that no one could attack a guest at Samhain, and that the householder had to give any request within reason. And it sounded like a reasonable request, but then when Elkmar came back the next day, Angus Og argued that a year is a day and all of time is a day and a night. Everything is a light and a dark cycle, and therefore Elkmar had given him the house for all of eternity and all of time. And then when they went to the High King to settle the argument, the High King was the Dagda and therefore backed Angus Og, and Elkmar got booted out of his gaff. So I feel like that to me is always like a first Halloween, like first trick or treat story. Like it's got all the ingredients of trick or treat, but we don't actually just not quite saying it. There's also a huge tradition in Ireland of stories about tricking the devil, and Irish people who were kind of so wicked that they sort of outwicketed the devil. In some of these stories, you get people making deals at Samhain. Samhain was a great time to make deals with the other world, with the devil. Again, highly discouraged, but there's a story in Kevin Danaher's book of if you find a briar that has a root at each end and that forms an arch, and you crawl under it at Samhain asking for what you want to ask for, the devil will fulfill the bargain. There's a story of a man who did that at Samhain and wished for proficiency in music, and when he came out found a fiddle with only one string on which he could only play one song, but it was a great song. And he ended up, the parish priest offered to exorcise it for him, and he was like, no, what are you talking about? This is the best. And he ended up going off to France and playing music to the court, and then confessing on his deathbed and having the fiddle exorcised and the fiddle string snapped, which always seemed like the real flaw in the Catholic philosophy to me when I was a kid in Catholic school, being like, why can't I just confess on my deathbed? And my teacher saying, what if you get hit by a bus? And tiny me saying, what if I don't? What if I have a great life in the French court as a brilliant musician, and then just confess all and go, whoopsie, my bad. Not casting aspersions on anybody else's religion, that was just how it always struck me when I was a kid. The reason that I mentioned those stories is that one of them gives us the tradition of the lantern in the shape of a face. It's the story called Stingy Jack, and it is about a man who was so terrible, he outwitted the devil 3 different times and sold his soul for 7 years of prosperity and luck. And every time the devil came to collect it, Jack managed to trick the devil into getting into some terrible situation that he needed Jack's help to get back out of. There are a number of different variations of this story. We've told it a few times on the podcast, I think. And Jack, by the time he died, went up to heaven. St. Peter at the gates of heaven said, absolutely not, you're the worst person in the world. And then when he went sent down to the gates of hell, the devil opened the door and was like, "Get out. I don't want you in my house." And threw a burning coal at him, which lodged inside of his skull, which is where we get jack-o'-lanterns. Except we didn't have pumpkins in Ireland. They are from, like, the Americas. So we used what we had, which were turnips and large potatoes. We carved those into lanterns with the faces on them. Pumpkins are easier to carve, so now in Ireland we do have pumpkins. They're in the supermarket, but turnips look way creepier. They're way harder to carve. I'll just say the effect of a pumpkin lantern is not the same as the effect of a turnip lantern. If you ever want to try it out for yourself, carve carefully. Don't cut yourself. I will take no responsibility for anybody's hand injuries. I feel like with all of these different things, you can kind of see modern Halloween like in there. Like all of the ingredients for modern Halloween are there. There's the soul cakes, there's the carving of the turnips, there's the pranks, there's the like disguising the face to hide from the dead. There's this tradition of hospitality to visitors. There's the tradition of like divination games and like a little bit of devilry and maybe a little bit of devil worship, and the belief of like souls and the creatures of the other world having sort of free access and free reign to this world. And that to me is still very present in modern Halloween and modern kind of Samhain celebrations. Like trick or treat just makes that prank soul cake thing into like a deal. And it has sort of come back to Ireland, and now obviously is something that kids do every year. And the masks and the costumes and the mischief and the fun. It's an extremely celebratory time of year still. And I do think that whatever spookiness is there is a fun kind of spookiness. If you look at Samhain as kind of the counterpart to Bealtaine, which I often do. Bealtaine is 6 months away. Bealtaine is the 1st of May and is the beginning of summer by tradition in Ireland. We have a whole video on it. It's kind of a reverse Halloween, and Halloween is all about like generosity, sharing, making sure that everybody has enough to get through the winter, community, connection, lighting those fires together, keeping those fires lit through the dark months. And I think for me, that's why I love it so much, and I hope that's why you love it too. I don't know why you love it. Maybe you don't love it, but if you don't love it, why did you click on this video? So let us know in the comments, do you like Halloween? Is it not the best? And if it isn't, which one is? How do you celebrate? How do you plan to celebrate? What are you doing this Samhain? What are you doing for Halloween? Did you learn something new from this video? Is there something that you think I should have mentioned in this video that I did not mention? All of those things would be great things to put in a comment. Let us know also if there are any other aspects of Irish folklore or mythology or culture that you would like us to do videos about, and we will get on that at some point. Not today though. Today I'm going to go celebrate, drink some more, drink out of my skull cup. Slán go fóill. You!